here's what I've come to realize, come to feel very strongly, is that the materialist scientific paradigm, which many people who think they're into science believe that science is materialistic. No, that's not the case. Science is an effort to inquire into the nature of reality. The idea that all of reality is only matter and energy is an interpretation, a metaphysical interpretation. And it doesn't even make sense, because we now know that this universe, the best evidence is the Big Bang is real. So if the universe was made of matter and energy at the moment of the explosion, what caused it?
Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and today I am delighted to be joined by Keith Thompson. Let me tell you about this incredible guy and what he's been up to. Keith's a longtime independent journalist and a nonfiction author. His book, Angels and Aliens, UFOs and the Mythic Imagination, was reviewed by the San Francisco Chronicle as, and I quote, the most fascinating book written on the subject. Keith has just completed a book about the UFO phenomenon with the title Cosmos Calling. I just turned that manuscript in, and he describes the UFO phenomenon, and especially its paranormal features, as a metaphoric call from the cosmos to humanity, to expand our thinking about the nature of reality and to step up our game, as he says it, on a species level. And this is why I'm so excited to talk to this man. We've already had a brief conversation. We hit it off. His book is slated for publication in the spring of 2024. And Keith, I'm so excited. Thank you for being in, my friend.
Well, it's great to be here. Great to be here. It's glad to get your invitation. I know what you do out there in the podcast zone. We used to call it blogosphere, but now it's the podcast zone. So I'm looking forward to a conversation. I feel in sync with the kind of things you normally talk about and the way you talk about them. So let's get going.
Absolutely. Yes, in more ways than one. You know, I just want to immediately visit something that you said to me in our conversation, you know, which really resonated with me. And I found myself telling my children, because I'm always talking to my children about these things, and they're fascinated by it. But you said, how can we expect? We look up into the sky and we see these, whatever they are. Everyone has a different idea of what they may be, right? But we want to know who they are and where they're from, right? That's our question, and we don't even know who we are and where we're from. That's what you told me, and I thought, oh my God, that is profoundly true. I just thought it'd be a great place to start.
It is a good place to start, and it's almost never where this subject goes to. We know that this phenomenon. When I say we know, I have to first exclude the class of professional debunkers who don't know, who don't want to know. And the debunker is that species of self-styled scientist who is inclined to say things like, well, this can't be happening, or this isn't happening because it can't be happening. We know, according to the laws of science, and then they'll name some set of metaphysical assumptions that they take as laws of science. So with that said, I'll go back to what I was just about to say. We know that when we talk about this phenomenon, we assume we know who we are. We take ourselves as an established, finished baseline. And it's one thing that's pretty clear is a human nature, at least it's clear to me, human nature is not necessarily finished. There are aspects of our nature that we don't understand very well. And we can get into that when we go down the line a little bit, but I'll put a flag out for this. In the Vedic traditions of India, the traditions of the Vedas, the spiritual tradition, there's a category of phenomena called siddhis, Siddhis, the siddhis. Now, the siddhis are the powers and capacities that emerge through traditional spiritual practice, where the goal is to wake up, in Buddhism, Hinduism, Sufism, the goal is to wake up, to be liberated from the egoic, separate self, and to realize your true nature as infinity, and so forth. Well, in the process of practicing, the practitioners found all kinds of strange phenomena coming up: telepathic stuff, clairvoyance, bilocation, Harry Potter type sorcery stuff. And the teachers, including Buddha, would say, pay no attention to that. That's not important. That's sideways phenomena. That's going to get you off the path. We're not here to learn. We're not here to learn to be magicians. We're here to wake up. Well, in a sense, that's good, maybe good, skillful teaching, if the goal is to wake up. But it could well be at the same time that part of our nature is to, in fact, wake up to a larger set of capacities that are intrinsic. For example, telepathy, clairvoyance, psychokinesis. They are far more common in human experience. And in fact, because we don't cultivate them, because we don't have a context for cultivating these extraordinary phenomena, they tend to emerge in sideways, often pathological way. For example, let me just give you one classic example of a practice setting. In the Roman Catholic and other monastic contemplative traditions, the identification, let's say, with the wounds of Jesus on the cross can be so profound, the sense of identifying, that the practitioner has stigmata that open up on the body, crosses, rosaries, mind-body imprints on the flesh of the deep concentration. Well, again, that would be probably a pathological, that is to say, non-functional. The contemplative doesn't practice unity with God in order to have these strange phenomena. Right. But what they speak to is a plasticity of the mind-body thing. And that plasticity could very well be the kind of ground we're meeting the UFO on, but we don't know it. We assume it has technological prowess, the UFOs can execute all of these extraordinary right turns and sudden accelerations, which is all true, by the way.
Yeah.
Evidence is very good, but we can also execute strange right turns and accelerations in our own nature. So that's a big part of what I'm writing about in this new book.
I love that, man. It's such it's a perspective that is not often explored, and it's so profound. Even what you said about the stigmata, when someone gets the stigmata, they're treated very differently all of a sudden. And depending on the context in which they get these wounds, sometimes they're hailed as, the next coming. And meanwhile, what if, just like you just said, what if on a very true level, it was a manifestation of their belief in this and nothing more but the capacity of this incredible mind body that we have and its capacity to affect our reality. And I never quite looked or thought of the stigmata as being possibly, that is one possible explanation for, what is psychosomatic symptom?
Well,
I used to fake sick when I was a kid, and I would literally, by the time I got, 10:30 rolled around, I was like, God damn it. My stomach was like, I had made myself sick. I had put myself in such a state trying to get out of school that I was sick by I couldn't even enjoy the movie I rented. I was like, I'm an idiot. But that's how strong our minds are.
When I was a kid, I used to fake getting ill. And by the time in the old days, the doctor would make house calls.
Yeah.
And he came with a little satchel. I was telling you how old I am. Maybe it's gone on longer than I think.
I was young. I'm just old enough to remember that.
Well, so the doctor would come. His name was Dr. Pinkerton. Dr. Alfred Pinkerton. And I don't know if he was in on it with me or not. He was a sweetheart of a guy. But I think I actually managed to raise my fever most of the time. Because and by the way, that's another point. Let's say the listener right now is saying stigmata. Well, what's that got to do with anything? Okay, let's put that there as one frame of reference. Contemplative phenomena that arise during contemplative practice, including, by the way, some rather well attested to witnessings of levitation. levitation. Now, when I say well attested to, the Catholic Church is actually quite scrupulous about wanting to bat down fake claims. They do not want to be a hall of magic tricks. Right. And so they have very strict policing. They inspect claims for miracles. And there are a few solid cases of multi-witness seeings of levitation. But again, that's the contemplative tradition. Let's take the placebo effect. I can't think of the number of times in an average year I come across a study where two populations are used. One is given the medicine for alleviating pain. The other think they're getting the medicine for alleviating pain, but they're not getting it. It's an inert substance, the placebo. Neither group knows which. It's double blind, and a significant, much higher than average, a greater than average percentage of the people who get the placebo, the inert substance, report pain reduction or some other measurable, in addition to subjective, some other measurable report. So what I'm often amazed at is when this is discussed in the media, the doctors come on and say, well, yeah, it's only the placebo effect. And I go, only the placebo effect. Do you guys not figure out what you're saying here? If human beings think that they are getting medicine, but they're not, but they're getting the effects of the medicine. And I give you one more framework. So there we have placebo in addition to contemplative practice. Now let's take professional sports. A good friend of mine named Michael Murphy, founder of Esalen Institute, the Human Potential Center in Northern California, founded in the 1960s. Written several books on human potential and the further reaches of human nature, one of which at the time was called The Psychic Side of Sports. He went to the 49ers, 1949ers, the San Francisco 49ers training camp, and was a friend of Jim, I believe it was Jim Brody, one of the early Brodys, someone Brody, before Joe Montana. And he got to know them, and he said, "Sure, Murphy, you can hang out with us and talk about what you're, about sports and human potential." And they had a night where they'd had a few beers, and the players were sharing with Murphy. They had, developed empathy, and they were talking about these moments of what we now call being in the zone. Right. Where Brody would say, the quarterback would say, "Mike, I got to tell you, there are many times when I get the ball, and I look down the field, where am I going to throw it, and time slows down. I have all the time I need to complete the play." Now, the average viewer, time doesn't slow down. It's still only 4 seconds. But these subjective shifts of time and space, well, Michael found as one after another, these athletes began to say, well, looking around, is it safe to talk about this stuff? Okay, let me tell you what I experienced. Well, okay, that was a great night, couple of beers, everybody getting a little open, sharing, being real. The next day, Mike went up to the various players and said, could I sit down and talk with you again and maybe turn on the tape recorder? And I said, "Oh, no, you just got us talking. You just got us talking last night." Right. And Mike said, "Well, did you tell me the truth?" "Well, yeah, but no, you got us going and it was fun, but no, I can't go on record with this stuff." Right. And Mike said that he had a sense of what it must have been like for Freud to discover the mechanism of repression. When people would start to say something in the therapeutic setting, and then they'd correct themselves. "Oh, no, I didn't long for my daughter. Right. I didn't long for my mother." Anything that would be, shameful. So again, what you're touching on is these phenomena are not considered real. And in fact, they're not supposed to be real. We know that the outer world is out here. The inner world is in here. And the inner world doesn't affect the outer world. Well, we actually know through paranormal research, psychokinesis, and synchronicity in general, these correspondences between mental and physical phenomena, All of which, by the way, notice we haven't even begun to talk about the UFO phenomenon.
I know we haven't, no.
Because we're coming at it in a way I didn't expect to. Namely, I mean, think of the number of times, maybe not many times. Have you ever had this experience? The phone rings, and while you're getting ready to answer, you have a thought.
You know exactly who it is. Yeah.
Yes, and it's someone you haven't talked about. No, what you know is, in your mind, suddenly you have an image. That's really the first thing you know. And it's someone you haven't thought of or seen for 10 years. Wonder how Sally's doing. You go to the phone, you look at the caller ID, you pick it up. Hello? Keith, it's Sally.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just thinking about you.
Yeah, in materialist science, that's called a coincidence.
Yeah, I know.
Just a coincidence. Well, by the way, there are coincidences. It's not that they don't occur. But there are so many examples in everyday life. We can discuss some categories if you want, but of the supernormal experiences in everyday life. And yet we learn to override them because our religious training tells us, no, let's don't go
Societal,
scientific training of 400 years of materialism.
Totally materialism, yeah.
The materialist worldview which is actually an anomaly throughout most of human history, prior to the scientific revolution, as we call it, much of which is very good. I'm very pro-science. That's a huge part of my book. I'm an empiricist. But precisely because I am an empiricist, I don't rule anything off the table. I don't say in advance, as most materialist scientists will. Well, in effect, they do say. Most of the debunkers say, well, that didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? Because we know that doesn't happen. Because of gravity or time and space. It can't be explained. So I've come to feel outside of several boxes. I'm outside that box. I'm a true skeptic, meaning I question all assumptions. I try to all the time.
Yeah.
When I feel I've reached a new insight about a pattern with the UFO phenomenon, I try to remind myself, okay, hold that tentatively. You don't necessarily have the final answer. And also, I'm very skeptical of many of the claims that are made about the phenomenon by pro-UFO people. In other words, there's something real going on. On that, I am absolutely unmovable. The traits and features of this phenomenon are not explainable solely by hoax, hallucination, misidentification. But at the level of interpretation, there's a lot of room to be skeptical about what we believe. So that's kind of my approach.
I love that approach, and it's a true pleasure to meet a true skeptic. I deal with a lot of skeptics with my particular points of view and the belief systems that I've adopted. And I'm fluent and fluid with them as well. You know, I will look at all the evidence, and I am not willing to be, stationary about most things. I can have my mind changed, and in fact, I'm always looking to have my awareness and understanding of something improved, however that may be. I don't see it as like, oh, well, I was wrong. No, I didn't have all the information, and I'm still collecting. So, I always have to remind my resident skeptic, he's become a friend, and he's a talented young man, but he's on some of my videos with me, and he helps me with a lot of them. That a skeptic truly looks at all the evidence and doesn't just look to debunk. It's not just a matter of, let me prove this is bullshit. It's a matter of, let me look at this in context and consider it, right? That's the difference between a debunking materialist who's got his mindset and a mission and someone who is a true skeptic. So it's a pleasure to talk to. And I find myself it's very easy for me to talk to true skeptics. I don't even butt heads.
I often get on UFO Twitter and get on the Twitter, use Twitter, and there's a group that calls itself UFO Twitter. There's a conversation about UFOs in the Twitter world, is what I really mean. And I see a constant reference among pro-UFO people, those who are committed to something. There is something going on here. There's a real phenomenon that is not reducible to all of the explanation. And they say it's the skeptics who refuse to open their mind. And sometimes I just can't resist. I'll say, no, it's the debunkers. You're talking about a debunker. Skepticism is not the enemy. Skepticism is not even a separate category.
No.
It should be built into the fabric of every observation. And it should include that we don't rule anything out of advance, off the table in advance. But at the same time, remarkable experience like levitation requires evidence, and it requires multiple witnesses and so forth. And that brings us into some of the phenomena like abductions, which are one of the most controversial parts of the field, including within the field. There's a lot of different opinions within the phenomenon, within the UFO research community about various aspects of the phenomenon. Because you think that there's one of the streams of thought that I've identified in UFO research is, let us emphasize the rational dimensions of this phenomenon so as to get greater buy-in from the public at large. Well, okay, that's a little tricky. Let us emphasize the most rational parts. The problem with that claim, first of all, there are parts of this that are entirely rational in the sense that there are repeated experiences,
commonalities throughout.
Commonalities and corroborations, but they're not strictly speaking rational. Much of this, that is to say, much of the phenomenon has an absurdity to it in a formal sense, which is part of what keeps many mainstream scientists at a distance. And in fact, there are many mainstream scientists who are actually quite interested in this phenomenon, but they do not talk about it at work. They don't talk about it with their colleagues.
Well, societal conditioning and character assassinations and smear campaigns have conditioned people the way that they wanted it for so long. Now they want people to talk about it. They have a different agenda now, in my opinion. But you have decades and decades of certain conditioning that happens. It becomes generational, and people don't forget. You know what I'm saying? Even if there's a healthy interest, people are like, well, they don't want to say anything. They don't want people to think they're crazy. You know what I mean? You have decades, generational conditioning of people being ashamed to share anything that would label them a kook or a nut or make everyone assume that they must have lost their minds. I mean, that is crazy. That amount of conditioning in a whole society it's incredible. It speaks to the level of effective propaganda that goes on in our country.
You've seen, of course, the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yes.
Well, I mean, it's I still think it's the best.
It is the classic.
Spielberg. I mean, we could discuss that
movie. He had a lot of information. That there's a lot of rumors about what he was exposed to, why he made that movie.
Well, and I'm glad to talk about that because there were some decisions he made along those lines. But you remember how the movie opened. It was very, very interesting. Just a couple of scenes. You didn't quite know what was going on. And one of them was the air traffic control center. And and this is very accurate. They showed 2 or 3 air traffic controllers saying, tower speaking to pilots. And the pilots speaking to the tower saying, we have a sighting, starboard side, or whatever the language would be. I'm not a pilot, but I've got. Do you have something to my right? The tower says no. Well, it's doing the following, and another pilot says, "Yeah, I've got it over here to my left." Blah blah blah. You go back and forth. It's very crisp. The tower, finally, at one point, says, "United 7631, do you wish to report an unidentified flying object?" Pause.
Yeah.
Negative. I do not wish to report. American Airlines 431. What about you? Do you want to report? No, sir. Negative.
Yeah.
Well, you can understand why they did not want to report.
Yeah.
They didn't say they didn't see it. They said they don't want to report it. They don't want to be interrogated by their superiors. Because the superiors don't want to interrogate them either. They don't want the media involved. The pilots probably knew, most pilots at that point knew, number one, these things are seen.
Yeah.
Number two, they're best seen and not discussed, because it can very well change your life. In fact, just last night,
affect your career, I mean, everything. Yeah.
I watched an episode of Unsolved Mysteries last night. It's currently on Netflix, and so it wasn't just last night that it was on. It's repeating, but it's about a UFO sighting in Pennsylvania, and or Michigan, I believe it was. I forget which one. They all run together at a certain point. But it was very, very good sighting. I'd never actually heard of it before, frankly. But in any case, it had all the dynamics of the witness being deeply moved, deeply transfixed, changed. You remember in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the Richard Dreyfuss, actually brought mud in from the outside and put it on his dining room table because he was trying to model the Devil's Tower in Wyoming. There's an obsessional quality that, and I say that not to be critical. UFO witnesses have had an experience that is so transformative, so unsettling, so beyond their framework, that they really, many of them do come to doubt whether or not they should have reported. I can even think of Whitley Strieber, the famous author of Communion, who wrote a very candid, forthcoming book about his own abduction experience. And I think it's fair to say Whitley's had some second thoughts about, he's described them to me, about certain things he revealed about the experience, which were profoundly embarrassing. They have typecast him as a goofball and maybe as a con man, depending on your view.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, many
people...
You
were trying to make money. I'm like, there's easier ways to make money, man. Seriously, I think I'm going to make up a story about it. And that is the longest, most arduous and persecuted road to becoming a con man. Of all the ways to become a con man, really, you're going to make up a story about a UFO and try and sell it? Are you serious? It's crazy that people even think that. But I suppose there's been a few. It just doesn't seem to me like the most easiest route a con man would want to take. You know what I'm saying?
I absolutely agree with you. I think of Carlos Castaneda and his series of novels. And I just call them novels. That's interesting. They are actually presented as the field work of an anthropologist. If you remember the books, the Portrait of a Sorcerer, what were they called? Well, they were best-selling 1960s, 70s novels of Castaneda, the anthropologist, having an encounter with a teacher named Don Juan Matus, and having some very extraordinary, extra-normal experiences. The anthropology community went nuts. They said, "This isn't."
Oh yeah,
this
sure,
isn't
my God,
real stuff. But Castaneda at least had the good sense to lay low. He didn't give interviews. He didn't ask for extra attention. Whereas Whitley, bless his heart, went public, had a lot of interviews. He went through a lot of psychological testing to try to prove that he wasn't crazy. No, it's not. You're absolutely right. It's not a good path to get rich. You might get rich. He did well with his first book, but it didn't set him up independently, I think, for the rest of his life. So
most of the time it doesn't.
Most of the time doesn't. In fact, most UFO books by firsthand witnesses do not do well.
No.
Because the details, again, are so absurd on the face of these medical examinations, quasi-medical examinations, the idea that there are hybrid babies involved. Well, the hybrid babies are never brought forth, which is perfect. The debunkers love that. Well, where are the hybrid babies? And so
they're in the ships.
there are details that, that keep the mainstream agents of official culture in the media, in science, in academia, allows them to say there's nothing to this. And meanwhile, these experiences continue to be reported throughout the land among the folk. There's a real split between the ordinary folk who report these experiences. And I say ordinary, I don't mean to be in any way disparaging. The average, there's a cross-section. There is no UFO witness. Some of the best sightings are airline pilots who can be fallible, sure. But what happens is the reports are made, they're dismissed by the various agents of official culture. And so the phenomenon is driven underground, deep into the psyche. and has and then there develops a great symbolic and mythological allure, and takes on an extremely highly significant, because like any repressed phenomenon becomes all the more important when it's suppressed. So because we haven't dealt with this straightforwardly
since 1947, maybe before that, but at least since then,
And so what we're dealing with now with the let's call it the disclosure effort, whatever, to make of it. I mean, we there's been some progress. The Pentagon office has said yes, they're now officially UFOs. We now call them UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. I think they've even called the office. They even allow the word anomaly to be used now. There's so many acronyms that are constantly changing. I can't keep track of them. But officially, the UFO has now arrived as UAP, but not in the eyes of the debunkers. The debunkers continue to push it all away.
Yeah, no, I know. It's amazing. They're like, well, now all of a sudden they're like, well, you can't trust the Pentagon. I'm like, okay. They're like, oh, now you're trusting the Pentagon? I'm like, dude, I don't trust the Pentagon as far as I can throw them, but there's a reason why they're saying what they're saying. I mean, obviously they have an agenda, but they're not surprising some of us. They're acknowledging the existence of something that a lot of us know, that these things have been around since we've been around, since like forever. I mean, they can be traced as far back as the Vedas. We see them in our oldest texts that we've deemed religious. Some of the most studied texts we see these phenomenon show up in. So that tells me that they've been around since we've been around, in one way, shape, or form or another. Well, so for the Pentagon to say, "Oh yeah, well they're here," no shit, they're here. Thanks a lot,
Well, also there's a strange kind of. I mean, we have to kind of grapple with this. If we have distrusted the Pentagon, if there's a basis for distrusting the Pentagon all this time, then are we now going to trust them to be doing the right thing? I mean, look, I think I don't know what the government knows. I tend to be skeptical, though, of the idea that the government does have the answers. I really do. Precisely because of, take the Nimitz Air Force carrier sightings, the Tic Tac sightings, that Elizondo has described in such detail, the absolutely rapid accelerations, the covering of massive, 25 miles in distance in 2 seconds. This is not a phenomenon that I would have to say I'm willing to make a bet that
I think you're right.
The government has, and I think what the government is hiding is that they don't have the answers, and they are not in a position to say something like, "Hello, we're now addressing the UFO phenomenon. There is something that invades our airspace with impunity," and then describe the actual maneuvers. It does all the following things. We don't begin to know what it is. We're investigating, and we'll keep you posted. Now we return to our regular programming. No, that's not.
We now return to our regular broadcast.
We want the government to have the answers, to the degree that we still expect that. I mean, at this point, there should be such general skepticism, as Ronald Reagan famously said, the 9 most dangerous words in the English language is, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." You should doubt the person who comes to your door and says, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." So I don't think most people expect help from the government.
No,
and we don't expect.
And I think you're honesty. Right. I do think you're right. I think that 98%, of any part of the government that deals with this is ignorant, is completely in the dark about it. And so I think in essence you're right. But I think there is a small percentage of people who do deal with some of the underground, trillion-dollar projects that have been going on since 1947. Even before, if you take into account what the Germans were doing. And there's a lot of documentation to back that up, about what the Germans were doing. And I know that it's become myth and it's become, cliche in a lot of ways, people thinking that but it is a fact that the Germans were developing a saucer. We know that. That famous picture of the German saucer is not photoshopped. Was it operational? No. That one was not operational, But they were working on, and they got the plans for a saucer from somewhere. It wasn't a German idea, as if these, as if any idea is any person's really. But you know what I'm saying? The Germans didn't just have like a eureka moment. They got the idea from someone or something, and they were working on these craft, and we knew that, and they were far ahead of us in their rocket technology, the propulsion technology, and their ideas were ahead of ours, which is why we had Operation Paperclip the way we did. And we learned a lot in Operation Paperclip, and we made a lot of concessions, unfortunately, to some of the Nazi ideology and the politics that were happening in Nazi Germany during World War II at the time. And so I think that, you have a complete separation now. Back, even when Reagan was... Reagan famously wrote in his diary, I don't know if you ever heard this, but he wrote, it was like 1984, I think, 1985, he wrote, and nobody allowed more money into these programs than Reagan. He was a freaking cash cow. They didn't have, he was just giving them so much money because of the Cold War. They were using that as, the biggest, that was what it said on the file. All the money had to go to defense and tactical stuff for the Cold War, but really they were funneling this money into, this is my opinion, obviously, the secret space program. But I do know that in Reagan's diary, in his journal, it says, and I quote, "Was visited by 3 space scientists today, and they told me that we can put 300 men in orbit today. God, can't believe it. When science fiction becomes science fact." Those were almost his exact words. Now, at the time, just as you probably already have come to the conclusion of, we had maybe 3, 4, 5 operational shuttles that fit about 5 people. None of them could fit 300 people in orbit, even if they all took off at the same time. Okay, we had nothing like that. But they were going to Reagan because he was giving them so much money. This is my opinion. But I think that they were just like, they loved this dude so much that they were just like, they were sitting there and drinking coffee with him, and they wanted to throw him a bone because he was just giving them so much money. And they were like, "Sir?" And they just told him. They didn't think it would end up in a journal, but it did. That was 1984. And they were talking about putting 300 people in orbit. They had that capacity. They told Reagan that. He wrote it in his diary. So that tells me that the secret space program is alive and well, and has been, and that, these little things leak out. And they're not by, it's not just, what did they mean? I'll tell you exactly what they meant. They meant what most of us believe, that they've developed this technology underground and kept it from the public because it's the same technology that Tesla would have rolled out, that would have allowed people free energy. So it's not about ETs and the suppression of, as much as it's about what have the monopolies built their empires on? Energy, oil, fossil fuels, you name it, electricity. Without those industries, you don't have the monopoly or the problems that the world is in right now. But that's the reason why the suppression became priority number 1 for the United States, because even at that time, those billionaires were the powerful, they were the unseen hand, doing things with the government that they wanted. That's my opinion. That's the way I see
you have
it.
just perfectly described, and I'm just be very objective and say what you've just described is a mythology, a full mythology. Now, I don't mean in that in a dismissive sense. You've described a scenario. That's what I mean when I say mythology. That is very alive in terms of the popular culture right now. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what the larger phenomenon is comprised of. These kinds of frankly unconfirmed, yet claims for which there is evidence, like you say. For example, let me give you another example. The famous meeting between Admiral Wilson and Eric Davis, the physicist, which did it take place or did it not take place? You may not be familiar with this case, but
it sounds familiar.
In around 2000, 2002, the physicist Eric Davis is alleged, I almost have to keep using this term in every aspect of what I want to, he is alleged to have had a meeting with Admiral Tom Wilson about Wilson having discovered that there are secret, deep, dark programs that deal with retrieved saucers that are being maintained by the aerospace
yes.
corporation.
Yes,
So
I know.
this is,
I know what you're talking.
now, this particular myth, I use the term myth again, not myth in terms of falsehood, but it's unconfirmed that this meeting took place. But there are a set of notes that have emerged from this alleged meeting. So again, the Eric Davis, Admiral Wilson notes are a very hot item right now in the UFO world. And in fact, let me kind of link this to some actual recent confirmed developments. The most recent federal legislation, I don't know the name of the bill, but it was signed by President Biden in December of 2022, allows people who have knowledge or claims of knowledge to be able to come forward and be whistleblowers and say what they claim they had contact with or who they claim to have had contact with.
That was championed by Dr. Stephen Greer.
Among others.
Yeah,
among others.
That's
and actually I would give even greater credit to the journalist Leslie Kane, New York Times, Ralph Blumenthal, and a host of other really good.
And we needed that. We needed that bill.
Well, so in any case now, so I have actually been, because I don't take things on faith. So I've been skeptical over the years. Yeah, there's always crash saucers, but we never see them. How many saucers could crash? And that they are each one covered up so effectively. At a certain point, a conspiracy doesn't work. There's always a glitch. And that's what I would tend to feel. Let me put that out there. So, okay, great. Now we have the likelihood that people will be coming forward. They won't be coming forward to the press. They'll be coming forward within the bureaucracy, and they'll be protected. They will not be subject to punitive actions because of their whistleblowing status. Does that mean I think in 3 months there's going to be evidence? No, it's not on a 3-month timetable. But I think if there's fire behind this smoke of crash saucers and dead aliens, then we're likely to see the fire. We're likely to find somebody who says Northrop or Lockheed Martin has, because that's the claim. The government has been, Skunk Works, has been offloading it to these quasi-independent, and they don't have they're not subject to Freedom of Information Act disclosure. No. Well, okay, so
they can get locked out. The government can get locked out, which is what happens.
And it's very, Jacques Vallée has said that the President of the United States, whomever he or she is at any given time, does not have a need to know. This is the most highly classified subject, he says, since the Manhattan Project.
That's exactly right.
I don't, why it's that classified is up. There's enormous speculation about why that's the case. Okay, but the point is, are we going to see some breaks, some chinks in the armor? It looks more plausible than it ever has been for quite some time.
Yeah. Yes, it does, my friend. You're right. There's, you're talking about projects that, even up until this year, when that bill or law was passed, whatever it falls under, even Congress members who were exposed for whatever reason to some of these projects, were told that they have to lie if ever asked about it, to the public, by reporters, by other people in government. And so that's the level of secrecy that we're talking about. People were like, well, no one. I was like, well, actually, but they tell them that by law they have to lie.
I don't know that they're told that they have to lie. They go to a classified hearing. They cannot release what is in a classified, and that's because of sources and means of collection. We don't.
I'm so sick of this stuff.
But I'm an American who does not want to give our secrets away to Russia and China. Okay, I don't think many people do. So I'm in favor of certain top secret classification for true national security. So in that sense, Marco Rubio and Senator Warner come out. They're not allowed to say what they saw.
I know,
but at the same time, I get what you're saying here. Senator Rubio is right on the edge of saying, I can't sit on this much longer.
Right.
What I'm being shown, what we're seeing, And I have to say, the Dog and Pony Show hearing that came out in 2022, last June, the head of the name is Moultrie, the head of the UFO task force was unbelievably ill-informed. Unless you want to say,
talk about embarrassing.
Embarrassing. I've never heard of the. I don't know much
insult.
about. I've never heard of Well, I've heard of Roswell in the popular press. That can't be an accurate response. That can't be an accurate response.
No, I mean, and that's what I mean. They take 2 steps forward and then they do backflips to get back. And like, why bother? You know what I'm saying? Like, so you're going to pretend like you know nothing? You're going to pretend like you have no. So why do we have the trial? You know what I mean? It's like, why are we doing this?
I'm going to be honest with you. What we're talking about is, I love these kind of conversations, but this is maybe 5% of what my book's about. I'm not dealing with government cover-up. I actually have a pretty good eye for a rabbit hole at this point. And I'll give you an example of what I think is a rabbit hole. I think the Bob Lazar case is a rabbit hole, meaning no matter how deeply you burrow down into the claims of this Las Vegas citizen who allegedly worked at Area 51, Section S or whatever.
Well, he did. He worked there.
Okay. Yeah. The point is, what he did there is uncertain.
What he did there, that's the question.
The point is, it's a rabbit hole. It's a rabbit hole. It does not lead to anything. I'm of the look. To me, there's no single case that's going to blow this thing open. Roswell is about. I'm sure some listeners think I'm probably delusional or misguided, at least, or ill-informed. Roswell is a cold case. Roswell is not going to be the definitive case. Most of the witnesses are dead. All of them are dead, I think.
Yeah.
There is some very suggestive circumstantial and physical evidence. There's no doubt about it. The government, something crashed out there.
Right.
And the government worked very hard to collect every shred of the physical evidence, went door to door according to credible witnesses. So I'm not saying the evidence isn't compelling. I'm saying it is so cold that it's, and I think the Lazar case is also cold, and also the Lazar cases, like many, there are aspects that don't add up to his story, but there are aspects that do. See, that's the point. Now, I'm not putting my money behind any single case. To me, it's the aggregation of evidence that that's compelling. And more fundamentally, I'm writing in this book. My argument really is how, apart from what the government knows, the phenomenon by its very characteristics will not allow the conventional scientific method to stand. I mean, that's not to say I think the UFO phenomenon is going to bring down Western science, but it can't be explained in terms of Western science. It is not just propulsion systems. This is phenomena that is essentially correlates with the religious miracles throughout history. It's in that category, and they're I don't know how closely you're familiar with the famous Kenneth Arnold case, the 1947 UFO sighting, out of which came the phrase "flying saucer." I've actually,
I'm not as familiar with it as you are, but I do know of it. I know you came across the details of the sighting.
Let me just give you. I'm going to put something. I printed this out from my book today so that I don't want to try to summarize this ad hoc. Okay, because I'd rather get it right. So this is just a short section from my book about this case. It's really significant for the reasons I'm going to point out. In an interview with journalist Paula Harris years later, Kim Arnold disclosed that her father, let me just summarize. Kenneth Arnold was the private pilot who in 1947, I think June 25th, was flying near Mount Rainier in the state of Washington, saw 9 objects that he said at the time were skipping through the sky like saucers. A news reporter at the time garbled that, mangled it, and said that he had seen flying saucers, not objects that were moving like saucers skipping over, but they were shaped like saucers. He never said they were. So later on, after his death, his daughter, Kim Arnold, disclosed that her father was, quote, perplexed and confused about everyone's concepts of aliens visiting from other planets, that type of thing. The objects my father saw pulsated with blue-white light from the center of their surfaces, similar to the rhythm and beating of our human hearts. My father believed they were alive. Absolutely. They were capable of changing their density. Rather than anything made out of nuts and bolts, he felt they were not mechanical in any sense at all. He kept that to himself. Why? Well, he was already a national laughingstock for reporting or seeming to report 9 objects that were thought to be nuts and bolts. So she said, no less remarkably, Kim said her dad believed UFOs come from a larger dimensional world, the world where we go when we die. Now, that is to say, the pilot was taken with an epiphany. As he watched these, he had a profound experience that he was seeing something from another realm. He was not a particularly religious man, so the idea that, oh, he's a devout, born-again Christian, etc., so that he would be inclined. No, he wasn't inclined. He was a occasionally church-going guy. But, and by the way, here's the other piece. Here's the other piece. Kim, his daughter, revealed that when her father returned from his fateful flight that day, inexplicable orbs of light began appearing in their house for the first time. She has also spoken about her mother's telepathic gifts and reincarnation beliefs, and how her parents were greatly stressed by the way her father's experiences were contorted by the media. So, okay, he sees these events in the sky. He kept to himself that he thought that they were beating like a human heart, and they pointed to some sense of larger reality, not a larger geographic reality of other galaxies. But he felt he was seeing a spiritual, if you will, phenomenon. And he kept that to himself. His wife had her own telepathic skills. This is actually a common theme. The paranormal dimensions of this, which tend to be played down by the UFO mainstream, which emphasizes that they are spaceships from outer space, because that's what we've all been acclimated to believe. By the way, I'm not saying they're not, but the defining case that led to the phrase flying saucers was misinterpreted, misreported, and significant details were kept back. So the defining case is actually more consistent with poltergeist or other paranormal phenomena than it would be consistent with an off the top of the head extraterrestrial interpretation. So that's one of the things I write about in the book.
Oh, I love that. And this is truly, I think, one of the dividing lines in the sand. It's like we started off talking about. I see, and people are like, well, how do you how does someone go from spiritual to believing in, ETs, and then believing like that the ETs are spiritual? And I'm like, it's hard to explain, but there is a line. There's some kind of linear connection. I don't know how else to describe it, but people, I often ask people, I'm like, have you ever seen a UFO? And sometimes they'll answer, yeah, and they're like, man, it was like. And sometimes it's an atheist talking, which cracks me up even more. They're like, it was like a religious experience. I was like, what? You're a freaking atheist. What does that mean? They were like, I don't know. It's just something so awesome about it, But people have experiences, right? And it's very hard for people who do not believe such a thing is possible to believe that they could have had that experience, right? And this is a materialism, I think, at its core, because their belief systems won't allow them to imagine that this person could be speaking about something that is valid and that they experience with their senses in this reality, in any reality. I mean, the only way we do experience things.
Here's what I've come to realize, come to feel very strongly, is that the materialist scientific paradigm, which many people who think they're into science believe that science is materialistic. No, that's not the case. Science is an effort to inquire into the nature of reality. The idea that all of reality is only matter and energy is an interpretation a metaphysical interpretation. And it doesn't even make sense because we now know that this universe, the best evidence is Big Bang is real. So if the universe was made of matter and energy at the moment of the explosion, what caused it? What existed before?
No, right. There's a problem with that. I mean,
there is a big problem, and beyond that, the materialist framework for 400 years has so segmented and narrowed our entire philosophical. It is removed from our lives, really, the full history of human interactions with experiences. Look, the official mythology of science says that the source, that the essence of life is material, dead matter, dead phenomena called matter, and that somehow, at some point in an evolution, this dead matter gave birth to the capacity for subjective experience out of dead matter, gave rise to the ability to taste the sweetness of an orange, to hear the heartbreakingly beautiful music of Bach and Mozart, to feel joy at the birth of a child. The dead universe gave birth to the capacity for subjective experience of consciousness. And we call that the hard problem of science. How does consciousness get born out of dead matter? Well, maybe consciousness is the ground of being.
That's right.
Because what do we ever have but experience?
That's right.
Everything takes place and is held in the context of consciousness. In any case, we may have it entirely backwards. Materialism has completely ruled off base a vast amount. So this speaks to your question. Is it extraterrestrial or is it spiritual? We need a context in which we need to soften these boundaries. And I think that's what's happening. I think we're living at a time when and this will speak to some of the kind of shows you do. A growing number of people in our culture now have had direct experience with meditation, altered states of consciousness, psychedelics, and other forms of opening perspective to greater realities. And so I think what we're seeing is we're not seeing new realities emerging. We're seeing the blinders removed from human beings to see the multi-dimensional, extra-dimensional, hyper-dimensional world in which we are always embedded. The challenge isn't to explain how could paranormal phenomena work. The challenge is to say, what is the nature of reality such that they do happen? Yes. It's correct. Paranormal phenomena can't work in a materialist worldview, according to materialist maps. So maybe our maps aren't up to date. The problem isn't reality. It's our maps of reality.
Just like our physics.
Limit most of what reality is allowed to be. So I think that's where I place the phenomenon. I don't have a clear picture about the degree to which what percentage of it is extraterrestrial in the Steven Spielberg sense versus interdimensional or parallel
and how do you draw that line anyway? Because I guarantee you that I'm willing to bet the house on it. I mean just think about how we got here. I believe that we are, spirits, souls, whatever you want to call them, energy that manifests itself in a human body to have a human experience. And that we came from, get this, not this three-dimensional reality, but a different dimensional reality. Right? So are we extraterrestrial? Because we didn't start here. We certainly didn't start here. Where would we have started? We were born and our spirit came here.
I'll tell you, I haven't met anybody who, whether it was through psychedelics or through meditation or through any kind of moment when they have a peak experience, those peak experiences when somehow the blinders get taken off, might be the birth of a child, the death of a family member. It can be profoundly, you reckon with the nature of reality when a parent dies,
Yeah.
when a child dies. It rips you apart. It takes away the barriers that prevent you from seeing the rawness of what is. Okay, so there's that level of existential, direct confrontation of reality. Or psychedelics. Wisely planned, intelligently navigated psychedelic journeys.
Yeah.
What is the most common statement people make when they have a larger experience? It is generally, I've had this for myself, and I continue to find more and more people confirming it. It's like, this is what it always is.
Yeah.
I had forgotten again. You come back from a psychedelic trip or from the moment of meditation or moment of prayer, the stillness of the mind, and in that stillness comes a recognition of that which is always so. It isn't something new.
It's something so familiar.
It's something you
right?
lost touch with. It's something familiar. That's why it's called true nature. You awaken. The ego doesn't get enlightened.
Right.
The person identification as an ego drops away. That is seen to have been a hindrance to what is always so. You and the universe are one thing.
That's right.
And I've forgotten it again. And I'll forget it again tomorrow. See, that's the constant forgetting, remembering, forgetting. But the moments of true nature, of direct recognition, are almost always seen as a remembering. So I think the UFO is a remembering of something. There's a remembering. Listen, the number of people I've talked to who've had, who've had the abduction experience, other close encounters experience, there are profoundly paranormal dimensions of it. They are not just physical events that come from someplace.
Never. And
people often have telepathic openings that continue. The children in Zimbabwe at the aerial school, 2000. Do I have the date right? 2004.
I don't have to look this one up.
I'm sorry, I'm having a kind of a block on the date, or was it 1994? The 1990s, I believe. In any case, the Zimbabwe aerial school, 62 school children are out on the playground. All of the teachers are in a meeting. Interesting. The 62 children are playing normal games. They look up, and there's a craft. And outside the craft suddenly are beings. And they're walking strangely. They're walking forward, and then they back up and walk forward again and back up. It's like a replaying of a in reverse and replay, reverse and replay. In any case, the direct connection with these beings was transformative for these kids. They ran inside, told the teachers. There was independent sighting. It's a very good case, but it is exactly the kind of a case that doesn't really break through. People say, when is the landing on the White House lawn going to take place?
Right.
I'm not sure in today's media environment the landing on the White House lawn would even register. I don't know,
I don't think
because there's so much noise in today's media environment. But the key is, in the Zimbabwe sighting, these school children wrestled with this for many years. And the inner dimension of this experience outside is very profound. So it cannot be separated from a kind of what we could call spiritual or numinous, holy experience, which our society has really lost language. We basically said you can go to church on Sundays, you can have religion on weekends or Saturdays or Sundays, depending on what tradition you are. But as a secular culture, we have compartmentalized the sacred. I think the UFO is one of many openings into breaking down that compartmentalization. Beyond that, I don't know what's going on. In fact, I will tell you, I'm one of the few people who's been observing this phenomenon for a long time who will say openly, I still don't know what a UFO is. I don't know what it is. But I do know it's a very great amount of energy in a small amount of space that can actually burn the skin, can damage the eyes. In terms of negatives, it has that side, but it also is like a subpoena. It'd be like a spiritual subpoena. The
Yeah.
impact of a UFO sighting, you don't forget about it, and you continue to return to the site. You continue to seek out other witnesses. So I think it's a whole full-scale return of something
there
sacred
tends
to
to
the
be,
culture.
yeah, and it's also, the quote side effects can be profound and lingering, and they can range this incredible array of things that I see, and I recognize a pattern that happens to people who have these, these incredible, you could call like now, again, we lack the framework to put this into context. Are they being taken to a ship? I don't know. They didn't bring back a little piece of the ship
Ashtray. They didn't
and
bring
have
back
it
the
diagnosed
ashtray.
as an unrecognizable metal, as if that would ever make the public anything than inquire anyway. But the point is, they had these incredible, very, very vivid, unforgettable experiences, and they were changed afterwards, right? They had all these different experiences that they didn't before, and they had a new understanding of reality they didn't before. Some of them claim that they understand what happened, and many of them don't. But a lot of them also say, well, like since then, I don't know how else to put it, but like my third eye has become open, because now I have, I just have a better sense of what people are thinking, and I just know things now. Some people are in an existential crisis when it happens, and they find themselves out of that afterwards. And sometimes that takes a little while,
Or it throws them
but
into
amazing things,
throws them into an existential crisis.
Yeah.
In fact, that is what Harvard psychiatrist John Mack, the late psychiatrist, who fatefully decided to investigate the alien abduction phenomenon. And I say fatefully because he paid a very steep price. Harvard was not pleased with him doing this, bringing this attention. But the point I wanted to make was what deeply, he called it ontological shock. Ontology is the division of philosophy that deals with the nature of being, ontology. Well, an ontological shock is when your sense of what is real is shaken to the core. It can happen when you've had a hurricane, hurricane survivors, other kind of trauma survivors, people who have been physically abused. There are many kinds of ontological shock and post-traumatic stress. Well, the UFO abduction encounter, and take another show to talk about the details of that, to give it the full subtlety that's going on. But the point is that phenomenon, the abduction experience, is so profound. I know I did an interview with Larry King on a show, Larry King Live, on CNN some years ago, and he was such a character. It was on my first book, Angels and Aliens, and he said, "Mr. Thompson, are they real? Are these abductions actually happening?" And I said, "Well, it depends. First, we've got to define real, Larry." No. Is it happening? Is it actually happening or not? And I had a moment of clarity. And I said, "Larry, here's my answer. If it happened to you or to me, we would believe it was real. If we had the experience they're reporting, we would believe it's real. That still leaves open to what extent the abduction phenomenon is happening in more dimensions of a reality that is always here, but is not always immediately obvious. That's an unresolved question." Well, he was okay because I answered his question. Yes, you would experience it as real.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's a great. No, I love that story. That's amazing. God, Larry King was I liked Larry King. I thought that he was, he's missed these days. I mean, he asked questions and he wasn't.
He was a straight shooter. He was an old style, almost vaudevillian at times, but he was he took whatever his producers brought to him, and he asked the basic questions.
Yeah.
and that's very rare now.
It
The
is.
the three news cable, Fox, CNN,
My God, yeah.
MSNBC, all of them are equally egregiously guilty of doing
Yeah.
something that shouldn't be happening. I mean, the lack of substance and depth uh,
Yeah.
is remarkable, and I have to say the lack of openness in this phenomenon. There's right now on Hulu. No, is it Hulu or is it Netflix? Right now on Netflix. No, excuse me, it is Hulu. Hulu and National Geographic. There is a multi-part documentary called UFOs, Encounter with the Unknown. I think is the title of it.
Yeah.
In any case, it started out. It was pitched as an independent production that was going to deal with the anomalous side, the anomalies,
Right.
the paranormal aspects. And as it went along, the networks said, no, no, don't go there.
Yeah.
We don't want to deal with the abductions, the stuff that gets too mind-bendingly into
Yeah.
ontology. Keep it with, keep these things floating in the sky. They're
That's
allowed to
right.
land. They're allowed to be perceived by radar, but they're not
Right.
allowed to impact human beings' inner life.
Right.
No, no, no. Well, I think that's slowly changing, but emphasis on
Yeah.
slow. And I hope,
Slow.
with my book, a big part of my aim was the aim of my book is the anomalies. It is the sense in
Yeah.
which this phenomenon it undercuts the easy division between the world out there, which we call physical, and the world in here, which we call inner. It undercuts that whole division. That's a phenomenon that is both objective and subjective, physical and psychic, in a way that our models, our maps can't account for. So what happens is our map drawers in science push it away. It's not happening. It couldn't be happening.
Right. It's impossible. Speed of light is the limit. You can't travel that far.
Neil deGrasse Tyson it would be a perfect. He's always brought out in these discussions, and he is openly. I don't never met him, and I probably could have a cup of coffee with him. But there's not many people. Actually, I have a pretty good list of people I wouldn't have a cup of coffee with, but he's not. He's not on it. In any case, he openly admits, he goes, I don't track this phenomenon because there's nothing going on. No, Neil, that's not how you do science. You're an astronomer. You don't track it because there's nothing going on? How do you know that if you don't track it? Come on.
Right.
So the debunkers are as much a bane as the believers who don't, the core of believers who don't pay any attention to the standards of critical thinking. I'm for critical thinking. And something is going on here. This phenomenon is not reducible to hoax.
I think any true critical thinking would give you a very, very high indication that something is going on. That's very hard to deny. Now, to go from there to ETs and that's the big
the interpretations
stretch,
can always.
right?
I'll give you an example. Michael Shermer, who edits Skeptic magazine. You may not know him. Michael Shermer is a skeptic. He's sometimes called a debunker because he's not happy. He's not open to UFOs being real, and he's not open to paranormal stuff. But he's a skeptic most of the time, rather than a knee-jerk debunker. He's a fair agent. I've never met Michael Shermer. I hope to cross paths with him at some point. Here's a fun story about Michael Shermer. He, on his honeymoon, he married a woman who, like he is a skeptic, believer in the materialist worldview. They go on their honeymoon. And while they're checking into they're coming home. I forget exactly the details, but they're in a place, and they suddenly hear music in the back of the house. And the Mrs. Shermer, his new bride, is emotionally taken because that song was a song from her childhood in Europe. So there's already. Listen, these two are not looking for a paranormal experience. So they go to the back of the house, open up a drawer. There's a radio that she has had that has been deader than a doornail or doorknob for years, suddenly broadcasting a song that has some significance, if I could remember the full story, some significance to her family. Michael Shermer, to his credit, wrote an essay about how
Wow.
this experience opened him to the possibility that synchronous connections between mind and matter might be real in a way that he had not been willing to consider. And he
Interesting.
left it there. That's all he did. He left it there. He didn't then say, but I've come to my senses and I know it couldn't be. No,
Right.
he didn't do that. So to
Good
me,
for him.
Michael Shermer is an example of a skeptic who
Yeah.
models when there's an awe-inspiring moment in life, the impulse to push it away is something to take a look at.
Yes.
That's something to be explained. The impulse to open to the possibility that there may be dimensions to this world that are, greater. That's
Yeah.
really my argument. The phenomenon points to a greater reality
Yes.
that is apparently always here, that comes into this reality, goes out. I use the metaphor in the book of a frog. If you knew anything about the optical cortex of a frog, you would know that they actually have enough optical capacity to see an indistinct range of gray and white and black, sufficient to let them be good catchers of flies when they
Right.
sit on the lily pad, and sufficient most of the time to help them dive into the water to avoid predators.
Right.
We don't say that the frog doesn't see accurately. We
Right.
say that the frog sees accurately according to its cognitive structure.
Right.
Well, I say the same thing about us. We see accurately according to our structure, but we don't
Right.
see all that is most of the time. The paranormal is more of what is, and it bleeds through. The UFO phenomenon is more of
Yes.
what is, and it bleeds through. So I think to the degree that partly we need to meet this phenomenon by opening more of our senses, our subtle senses, using our subtle bodies, if you will, because I think that's where much of this phenomenon is taking place, in bodies that our official science don't even acknowledge. Most mythologies of the world have language for subtle bodies, astral bodies, etheric bodies. So you don't have to agree with the language. You don't have to agree with theosophy.
No.
But we've written too much of the territory out of reality. And, reality finally says, you may not acknowledge. It's like someone says, do you think these could be angels or demons? And I say, just because we've stopped believing in angels and demons doesn't mean they've stopped believing in us.
That's right.
These corridors, they may be part of our reality. Deathbed phenomena happen all the time for the
That's
dying.
right.
You see your relatives coming.
And near-death
pull you
experiences
across-
are hard to deny because
they
they're
are.
firsthand accounts.
Well, and they
And
are.
there again, you have some incredible commonalities that resound throughout, and you can't, you know what I mean? Like, these experiences are happening. They're maybe less rare than the abduction phenomenon, but those people, have gone and come back, and many of them have quite a remarkable new understanding of this life afterwards, right? I mean, that is something that you cannot deny. So, and you know what, Keith, I've yet to meet a spiritual daily, practitioner, meditator who doesn't believe in the metaphysical, the paranormal, the supernatural. I have never met one. In fact, I mean, the people who I know who take this hardline materialistic view stay as far away from that space in their heads as anyone I know. They just keep going. They're very fast.
Well, it's possible to lock these, the hardcore rationalists. How come none of my hardcore rationalist friends and I never have these experiences? I kind of thought, do you not see that as a rhetorical question?
Yeah.
And what I mean by that, I'm simply saying it is possible to have such a rigid rationalist worldview. You can shut out practically anything. You can shut out your wife's feelings. You can shut out your children's feelings. We don't need a paranormal hypothesis to explain how we can manage to shut out life that isn't something we're interested in. Where, in a general principle, I'm not saying if you open, well, I am saying that there is some relationship to opening to the possibility, to larger
Yes,
reality, just some opening to the possibility. You don't
absolutely.
require, UFOs don't happen because people believe in them. They
No.
happen, when they do happen, it's because the person is open to, the person is open to saying it happened. It's a
Yeah.
willingness to acknowledge that it happened, and there is a kind of opening, a willingness to let go of some boundaries that make it
Hmm.
impossible. So, yeah, the hardcore reductionists will always find evidence that the world is a
Yeah.
small and gloomy, grim place,
And
because that's
that's,
the worldview they bring. We see what we
yeah.
see.
I think in our lifetime, a lot of it is going to be kind of blown away. I just feel like there's so much happening, and human consciousness is expanding on a level that maybe it hasn't in a long time, as far as I understand it. And I just think maybe in the next 10, 20 years, we are going to see some things brought to light that people did not think was possible. I think it's going to be part of the things that have to happen if this species, this iteration of humanity is going to make it. Then we need to open up our awareness and understanding of each other and this wonderful world that we live in, and the opportunity it presents us on how we can live together and create heaven right here on earth. That's what I believe. And I think one way or another it has to happen, or we're not going to make it, because the way we're going on right now, I think, is unsustainable. We're doing so much damage to the planet, and I'm not talking about climate change or any of that nonsense. I'm talking about the level of pollution. The planet's going to be fine, but whether we're here or not is another question at this rate. And in what way we survive. But I wanted to ask you before we get too close to having to close out this session, because I have so many questions I didn't even get to, Keith. How did you get into this? What sparked your, how did you get a passion for this? Was there an event?
Well, there was an event, but it's not the kind that you're thinking. I did not have a UFO experience.
Okay.
I got interested in the UFO phenomenon as a kid at age 12, and even then I didn't come at it through Star Trek or Star
Yeah.
Wars or science fiction. I'm not a sci-fi guy. I respect there's really good sci-fi
Mm-hmm.
literature. Philip K. Dick is one of the greatest, but it's not a genre of mine. So at age 12, I was in the sixth grade. It was my turn. We all took turns doing current event stories. We bring a current event to the class and talk about it, bring clippings, and we pay attention to a story. It was one of the best assignments I think it's just a teacher uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, can require. So at the time, I was living in Ohio, Midwest. There was a UFO sighting going on in Dexter, Michigan, that was over a period of 4 days, called a UFO flap. It was
Mm.
over several days, and it got national news. Walter Cronkite of the CBS Evening News
Wow.
was covering it every night. So young Keith made that his story. I don't know how
Wow.
many days I paid attention, but I came to class and I told the story. Now, here's what really grabbed me. Uh, at one point, the UFO Air Force investigator J. Allen Hynek,
Mm.
Hynek, who became legendary in the UFO field, was called into Dexter. Now, his job, essentially, he didn't fully know it at the time, but he was an astronomer from Ohio State University who was called in by the Air Force to be their paid consultant. And his unspoken job was, Allen, we want you to just get rid of this.
Mm.
Most that you agree, and it happened that Hynek believed that 80% of most sightings are explainable, and in fact that's the best evidence.
Right.
80% of most UFO, 80% of UFO sightings are mundane, misidentified. It's the 10, 15, 20% that remain, which is still quite a lot. So
Right.
Hynek didn't see that he was doing a bad job. He thought they probably could be explained away. So it was a kind of
Mm-hmm.
agreement between him and the Air Force. He came to Dexter, Michigan. He did some poking around. He got driven around and went to the sites, including to a swamp out in the field where there were lights that had been seen. And then it came time for him to hold a news conference. So this is part of what I told my class about. Hynek stood before a bunch of reporters with cameras and microphones, and they said, "What's going on? What's your verdict? What's happening?" He went down the list of possibilities, and he said, "As for the one over at the south edge of town near the swamp, there is a phenomenon that can emerge involving the rising methane from the swamp, which can catch fire and create a phenomenon called swamp gas."
Yeah.
That's all he said was let slip the phrase swamp gas. He said later he was mortified to watch the reporters jump like a herd of stallions of horses running out to the payphones to call the news. Hynek says it's all swamp gas.
Swamp gas, yeah.
He didn't say they were all. He inartfully used a phrase he shouldn't have used. Cronkite and other reporters said it was a cover-up. It was an insult. The people of Dexter, Michigan, thought that they were being made fun of by the city slicker UFO investigator. So this was all part of my story to the class. I said, this is obviously not a good, that was obviously not a good interpretation. I told them, age 12. So the questions came, Keith, what do you think they were?
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know. But the swamp gas interpretation wasn't appropriate. And they said, do you believe in UFO? Do you believe in flying saucers? And the class snickered. And it's when I first realized, there's a snicker factor here.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't believe or disbelieve. And when they said, what do you believe? And you know what? My teacher, her name was Gloria Lowry. She said, class, I think you're missing the point. And then she referred to me as Mr. Thompson. She said, Mr. Thompson is saying it's important to keep our minds open. It's important not to rush to judgment. It's important to follow the evidence wherever it leads. I can tell you that at that moment, one of the first times as a young person, I felt really seen. I felt like it was a benediction. I felt like an adult had spoken to me, an aspiring adult, with respect and approval. Like, keep your mind open, follow the evidence wherever it leads. Well, long story short, on that day, I realized I'm an empiricist. I take an empirical approach. I didn't know the word yet. I wouldn't discover the word until I went to college and read William James, the great American philosopher, psychologist, who spoke about radical empiricism, saying all experiences can be studied. We can set aside our interpretation of the experience, and we study the experience. We allow the experience to get on the table. We set aside our beliefs about whether it's possible or what's true. And I said, bingo, that's been my entire approach to this phenomenon. I'm a radical empiricist, meaning all we have ever to deal with are experiences. Some of them feel more like mind, and some of our experiences feel more like matter, but we never have anything other than experience. So to me, the UFO phenomenon is about experience that doesn't happen to fit our current mappings. And one more thing, about follow the evidence wherever it leads. My sixth grade teacher's little mantra has inspired me all along. I didn't get into the UFO. By the way, from that point on, I didn't consider myself a UFO junkie.
Right.
I just continued paying attention. I read the books. I thought this is a gold mine in terms of a phenomenon that appears to the public, but is consistently denied by various agents of official culture. There's a disconnect. This is what people report. This is what gets said. No, you didn't see that. Thank you. Go home, people. I said, that is a story. That itself is the story, not necessarily the cover-up. The cover-up is cognitive. It's our belief about what is possible. It's worldview. Our worldviews don't allow us to see all that is. So from that point on, I still am not a sci-fi fan per se. I don't come at this. I don't attend UFO meetings. I do my best to stay away from them most of the time. As for people in the field, there are some researchers. Jacques Vallée. We do a show on Jacques Vallée sometime, the French researcher who actually was a believer in the ET hypothesis and slowly realized there was no basis in the evidence for excluding the full range of human interactions, religious miracles, paranormal phenomena, shamanism, a whole range of the interactions with dwarves and fairies and the Celtic cultures. Fairies abduct children in the Celtic culture. UFOs abduct human beings in ours. Well, the modern day UFO researchers, that's just a surface resemblance. That's stew-pot thinking. Stir all that in and it gets... No, the UFO is a separate frame of reference. It should be kept away from that. And Vallée famously said, no, with its French accent, no, that is not valid science. We don't... There's no basis for separating the archetypes of the alien, the alien abduction from the fairy abduction. I tell you, there's no basis. And he was right.
It's true.
And does it make it harder?
It's a good
sure.
point. Yeah.
If you're an engineer, if you're a professor of engineering and you have a
you don't want to hear
sideline,
that.
well, if you have a sideline interest in the UFO phenomenon, you're already having a hard time explaining to your colleagues at the university that you're interested in UFO. You don't want fairies and elves and dwarves. Well,
no.
Then you better get a better hobby. You better get another hobby because if you want to deal with the phenomenon, you got to follow the evidence wherever it goes. So a lot of the abduction people aren't happy to hear that because it somehow seems to mean, the abductions are just in the same category as fairies and elves. That doesn't mean to dismiss it.
No.
It says that maybe the fairy lore was never just fairy tales.
That's right.
They've come down to us as fairy tales, but maybe in their own culture, the fairy tales of abductions were actually sighting reports. So we're dealing with something larger than something that started happening in 1947 with Kenneth Arnold, who I've already pointed out, his actual experience was closer to a spiritual phenomenon or paranormal phenomenon than an extraterrestrial phenomenon.
It's a phenomenal series of points you make and profound points of interest. For me personally, I consider myself a spiritual guy, and I'm very much into all this lore, and I am also love learning and exploring metaphysical concepts. So, when these worlds blend for me and you articulate them in a way that is just absolutely wonderful. And I didn't even get to a lot of the questions I have. So you're going to have to come back on. We'll wait till if we can wait till your new book comes out. But if not, I still have so many questions for you, Keith. And, so much wisdom in what you're saying about truly having an open mind, and how that doesn't then turn you into, somebody who's trying to storm into Area 51
or into the debunker side.
That's right.
It doesn't make her. In fact, I can tell a debunker. I can smell a debunker from across the street. The ones who it's a laugh factor. They chortle, they sneer. And
they just dismiss like that,
And so anyway, I'd be happy to come back when the book is out. And if there's some kind of an imminent breakthrough, if the Pentagon, feel free to call me. I'm kind of. I
have your number now.
I get called by. I've been on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. I get called.
That's where I heard you first.
I get invitations. I'm sort of I'm considered a kind of a, for better or worse, at this point in my life, I'm a senior observer. I have senior status on the UFO and paranormal stuff, which is great. I don't think it's particularly the content of the phenomenon. I don't even consider myself a UFO researcher. I consider myself an observer of reality that includes these phenomena.
Right.
Wow.
I love
why would we rule anything? It'd be like Charles Darwin, to whom I do not casually compare myself, but Charles Darwin was not even a scientist. He was a British gentleman with some amount of wealth that allowed him to have hobbies. His hobbies happened to be a keen interest in the natural world. So he sailed to the Galapagos Islands. He collected fossils. He noticed that the fossils over here were different from the fossils over here. He reached some conclusions about the way about species.
Yes, he wrote them down.
The origin of species. He did not have the final word.
No.
A whole other conversation we can have someday is
that's
how
right. That's a whole can of worms we can open.
What we are is not just the result of gradual random mutations. Trust me. The Cambrian explosion during the Cambrian era 500 million years ago, all animal species that we acknowledge just popped pretty much in a realm of 10 to 15 million years. Well, that's still a lot of time.
No,
in the big
it's
picture,
the equivalent to like the Big Bang in biology.
It's the Big Bang. It's a blink of an eye. So, yes, gradual random mutations account for the surface level, but there is, the phrase intelligent design. Oh, you're a believer in intelligent design. That's pseudoscience.
Come on,
well, here's what I don't know, that there's a designer called God. I don't know that. But I know that creativity
you can see
is inherent in this game we're playing. This consciousness is not an after effect. It's not an add-on. Consciousness, the life force. By the way, how did rocks become living? How did inorganic become organic?
Right.
Wait, they still don't know.
And vice versa.
It's called promissory materialism. Promissory materialism is when you have people like Richard Dawkins and all the atheists, the wonderful atheist reductionists. He says, well, it's only a matter of time. We'll find out how life emerged out of it. It'll come down the road. No, it's not going to happen that way. But it is a huge anomaly that we can't explain how life and how consciousness emerged. So we've got some wrong assumptions, and I think UFOs are a way in. It's not even required, but UFOs are a way into a whole larger set of conversations that are important to have about how we got here and who we are.
Yeah. They're fundamental. They're conversations we need to be having. That's why I'm enjoying this one so much. And I mean, I usually end by asking my guests to share some wisdom, but you've been sharing wisdom right along, and you've given some great advice for people who are listening, about moving forward in their lives and keeping an open mind, and the universe is waiting to surprise you. Whatever, you don't have to call it God. I mean, this life, this experience is waiting to surprise you. If you open your blinders just a little and allow for it, right? And you've articulated that so well, Keith, and I appreciate your time so much.
Let me just summarize.
Go for it.
Let me give you one. It's a word of wisdom, but it's not my wisdom. I'll go back to the Zimbabwe aerial school phenomenon. A young girl, age 8 at the time, her name was Emily Trim, one of the students who on a playground locked eyes with a strange black being who was moving in a strange way, and they had a moment of eye to eye. And of course, all the students were disbelieved at first, but they were put in rooms and they drew pictures, and the certainty of what they had seen was so clearly irreducible. Well, so Emily happened to have as her parents a couple of devout religious individuals, mom and dad, who essentially told her and her brother and sister, who were also at the aerial school of the day, that didn't happen. We don't talk about that in this family. It just didn't happen. Well, can you imagine the disconnect that brought
Poor girl,
for her and other students? So I write about this in the book. It's one of my favorite chapters, because what happened eventually was 20 years later, Emily got an invitation to come back to the aerial school for a reunion. That class was going to have a reunion. And Emily put down the invitation, and she subsequently told the director of the documentary called Aerial Phenomena, she said, I knew I had to go back. I had unfinished business. So she went back to Zimbabwe, went back to the aerial school, started to talk to the students who likewise were told it didn't happen. Right. You can't talk about this. These things don't happen. She began to summon her courage. And here's the key. One member of the school, a faculty, said, Emily, I'm going tomorrow to visit one of the village elders. Would you like to come with me? She said, yes. When I was a student at the school, I never got to talk with anybody. You know, we were this little enclave, this little school in South Africa. Yes, well, the village elder was a spiritual teacher, a shaman. So she was driven to the edge of town, and actually it was the son of the spiritual teacher. He says, "Welcome, Emily. Sit, tell me, what brings you back?" She said, "Well, I came back because 20 years ago." Yes, I know what happened. And I tell you, I sit here and I tell you, you are to speak of this.
Yeah.
She said, "What are you?" I mean, she, couldn't even speak. He said, "You are to speak of this. You were a child, and you saw it with the child's eyes. That is what you are called to do." Well, she was already an artist, but all her drawings of it up to that date had been dark and gloomy and ominous, consistent with having parents who said, "That didn't happen.
Right.
It's the devil." So from that day on, she began to paint with colors. She began to draw far more life-affirming photographs. She, by opening to what had happened to her and acknowledging that it had happened 20 years later, was allowed to come to fruition. So what am I saying here? If there's anybody listening to this who's had an experience, whether it's with a UFO, with beings that seem to be from another world, shamanic experience, astral, etheric, whatever. If you've had something that has upset your sense of what is, allow yourself to be with it. Tell one person. You know, I often get asked this, Keith, would you recommend, should somebody who's had an encounter, a life-changing encounter, should they tell somebody? My answer to this always is tell somebody. Don't tell everybody. Do not hold a news conference. Don't go on Oprah. Don't go on TV because you'll lose your life. But find somebody, a parent, a friend, a pastor, a counselor. Unburden yourself. Let it be real, but keep it also on the down low. And be wise with it. There's a famous line from the German poet Goethe. Tell a wise person, or else keep silent, for the mass man will mock it right away. The mass man, the man on the street, will mock you. If you've had a profound experience, tell it to another wise person.
Yeah.
So that would be the closest I have to any words of wisdom is to.
I appreciate it. Those are great words of wisdom, and I'm sure that anyone who's stuck with us and listened to us this far is going to be rewarded for it with just that, because those words will hit the person who needs to hear them, and I just know how things work. Doors will open for them. That's usually the way things.
And I've known numerous UFO close encounter people, including Calvin Parker in Pascagoula, Mississippi, one of the most famous UFO researchers. He literally took on an assumed name to hide after his UFO experience, and his life did not flourish during that period. Long story. One day his wife said, "Calvin, you've got to write a book. You've got to tell your story. You get it out of yourself." And he did, and he is now at age 75 or 78 at peace. He says, "I still don't know what happened that day."
You tell your truth.
But he said,
things happen.
He said, "I still don't know what happened, but I do know something happened." To me, that could be the name of a book. Something happened. You don't need to know where it was from. You don't even need to believe what the beings may tell you. These beings are not necessarily trustworthy. But don't doubt that some interaction took place. And, and it doesn't make you a saint, but it doesn't put you in the hands of the devil either. It means you've had you crazy either. Yeah, you don't have to let it make you crazy. But this society is configured to make you crazy. No, it didn't happen. That didn't happen. That couldn't have happened, sweetheart. That couldn't have happened. Now you got to stop believing that. Well, think of all the other areas of our lives where we're told that didn't happen. Your uncle didn't do that behind the boathouse. Your brother didn't do that to you. Nothing to see here. No, we're living in a time when now people are beginning to say, "I'm going to speak my truth," and it can be messy sometimes, but. There you go. Reality. We have an incredible, having a human incarnation. Wow.
Yeah.
A great opportunity.
It's an amazing experience. Thank you so much for your time, Keith. It's been real, my friend. I appreciate your wisdom, and we're going to do it again. I'm going to be in touch. I'll let you know when this is going to come out.
I'll be back.
Okay, my friend. Take care.
Okay.
Thank you so much.